Hi, I'm Jeff Miracola, fantasy artist and illustrator. And this is me trying to figure out what I want to draw. Well, that's not entirely true. I kind of sat back for a little bit and envisioned what it is that I wanted to draw. And so now it's just a matter of me drawing out the basic shapes for the figure. In this particular drawing, I'm not using any reference. I'm just drawing from my head. Also trying to put the figure in the correct position on my paper because I know that I want a bunch of roots growing from the figure's head, and I want to leave lots of room for that. Because this is a drawing, I'm not quite doing this, well, I don't really have any set method. I change my methods all the time, and sometimes I do a drawing like this and then I'll do the inking on a light table. But in this instance, I am going to be doing this drawing and then inking directly on top of the drawing. So I'm really trying to make sure that I get the position of the figure and all the different elements in the right place on my paper. But once I've got that basic shape of that figure down, then I start to go in and work on some of the details and make some lines a little more, define the shapes and make some lines a little darker and whatnot. And a lot of this is just, like I said, I just sat down and I envisioned it in my head what I wanted this to be. So really I'm kind of figuring it out as I draw. I know that I want those roots on the head to be against a dark background, so I'm kind of drawing in what I think is maybe a large shadow area for this figure, as if there's a light, only one light source at the front of the figure. I also wasn't really happy with the roots, the kind of magical roots that the figure is holding. I felt like I could do better. I felt like I could get something that was a little more twisty and expressive. So that's why I redrew that there. And now I'm just going through the time-consuming process of creating all these roots, the root system, trying to work this out in pencil before I go to ink. Speaking of ink, I am using my Pentel brush pen. And I just get started with this. This is monotonous work. I don't want to call it boring because I don't actually find this kind of work boring. I actually find it very relaxing and therapeutic. Now, I don't know what you do when you work on your drawings, but oftentimes I listen to music when I draw, especially when I ink. I try listening to audiobooks and stuff like that once in a while, but I can't quite do that. I either draw in silence or I listen to music. So I find this very relaxing. And if you've seen some of my other inking videos, then you know that I try to ink on the outside of my pencil lines, because if I ink on the inside of the pencil line, then the object that I'm drawing actually gets a little smaller. So I try to ink on the outside of the pencil line when I can. Instead of using a brush to fill in that large black area, I'm just using the Pentel brush itself, just so that I have the ink matches, and also I was being kind of lazy and didn't feel like switching tools. Like I was saying earlier, normally I would probably put something like this on a light table, put my drawing on a light table with my drawing paper over it, and then I would do the inking on that. But I don't always stick to one method, and like I said earlier, in this instance, I felt like just going directly over the pencil drawing. But that does present some problems at times, and you can see here on the face, there's an awful lot of pencil marks and smudges and pencil lines getting in the way of the inking. So it can get a little bit tricky at times to know where to put my ink lines down, but I find my way through it. It can get a little confusing at times with all these pencil marks all over the place, and so after a while I have to let the ink dry so that I can erase things here and there just to clear it up for myself so I can see what's going on. I also try when I'm inking to get a little more expressive with my lines than I did with my pencil drawing. There's something wonderful about inking in that you can do that. Especially with a brush. For me at least, I'm able to get a little more expressive with my curves and the way I create my forms and outline my forms when I'm using the ink as opposed to the pencil. As you can see, this piece is kind of an exercise in patience and monotony. Inking all those roots and then filling in this large black area. You gotta really be comfortable spending quiet time with yourself when you're doing ink drawings like this. So I thought this would be an interesting thing to do is instead of using my brush to hatch out the edges of the shadow, I thought it would be fun to kind of create a texture using white ink along the border of that shadow. So effectively creating my own kind of gradient from white to black, but at the same time adding some, fun, unique texture to the piece. So I'm just putting some of this white ink onto an old CD case and using a toothbrush. And of course, as I always do with anything I'm going to be splattering, I make sure to test it out on another surface first. And the nice thing about using this white ink is that I get these really fine dots. If I used white paint, it wouldn't give me the same kind of dot pattern that I'm getting with this the pen white ink. Alright, so there we go. Load up my toothbrush again. Again, right before I do, I want to make sure I splatter that so that you don't get any big gobs of white ink. Then it's just a matter of going along the edge here of the shadow and splattering. I'm not trying to be too exact here. I always, when I do stuff like this, I always leave some room for those happy accidents and those kinds of mistakes and all those little white specks flying off into the black area there. That doesn't bother me one bit. I kind of like that. I wanted to cover up the top portion of the drawing because I didn't want the white specks to go all the way to the top. But just I keep working that edge until I'm happy with what I've got. I've got the silhouettes for these shapes now, for the roots and for this magical root system that the figure's holding. Now it's time to get into some of that detail work. And the direction of these inner lines is important because that's what's going to give me that sense of that form twisting around, and it's got more expression now once you see all these lines that I drop in here. It's not just some flat, boring, silhouetted shape. It starts to have some form. It starts to have some movement, more importantly, because that's what I want this to have. I want it to have a little bit of movement. And while I'm doing that, take a look at that speckled white that I put down there over the shadow that I was talking about. You can see on the paper that it's actually got some texture to it. The white ink is built up. You're not going to see that in like a final scan of the piece, of course, but when you're looking at the original, it's actually kind of neat because it's just got this wonderful stucco texture to it. I do this kind of stuff all the time. I put these pencil marks down, but then I go, you know what, I'm going to add little embellishes and things like that here and there and change things. Get inspired at the moment like this to go, I think there should be a shape that goes up here across the thigh. It just helps to define the shape of that thigh as well, the curvature of it. Yeah, this drawing wasn't planned out like I'd plan out a lot of my other drawings, but that's okay. Every once in a while, I like to sit down and just draw and see what I come up with and hope that I don't mess it up. I also like to try to vary my strokes and my textures or my line weights in my pieces as much as possible. I just find it's pretty interesting to look at black and white pieces that have a variation of line weight and strokes and textures. So that's why I broke out the pen nib here and just using a mapping nib, which is a really fine point pen nib. And figured, I think this would be a good thing to use to kind of add all the texture for the roots. The pen nib gives me a nice clean line to pull off those things. If I had used the brush pen here, I think it would start to get a little bit muddied up. You'd start to get, it's such a small area to work in with these roots that the brush pen would really kind of destroy all the stuff happening in there. So here we go. Here's another mapping nib. This one's a really fine, even finer than the one I had before. So as I start to get into some of these areas of these roots, I'm being a little more methodical about the lines I'm putting down. I'm just not scratching away like crazy. I'm trying to create kind of a wood grain texture, the lines. And also along the figure here, again, like I was saying, I like to have a variation of things happening in my pieces. Trying to do kind of a wiggly, broken line approach to the shading on the figure. There's no reason for that other than the fact that I just wanted it to be different and have it have a different look and feel on the figure than it does on, say, the roots. I also do like these broken line techniques too, where you kind of draw a line, but then you stop it, put a dot, and continue the line. There's no magic to it. It's just instinctual for me, kind of to not have everything look all the same. I know I keep saying that here, but that's really important for the way I do my ink drawings. Is I like there to be some variation. Let's see that, how I've got those lines just stopping, and then there's a dot. It's a broken section of it, and some are not broken. You know, maybe some people don't notice that stuff, but when I look at ink drawings, I do. And that's the stuff that's exciting to me, is finding all those different kinds of strokes. Now this bothered me here, right? The thickness of her waistline here, because I've got those roots growing off of her back. It's just not a nice shape. So just penciled in part of that curve here and just using my brush pen to just knock out some of that and thin out her waist area there with those roots. Feels a lot better now that I did that. Oh, here we go, breaking out another tool. This is just a little watercolor brush. But I felt like, I could really use some smaller branches, twigs and things like that, kind of coming off the end of some of these roots or branches. I keep calling them roots, but I mean, they're branches, roots, whatever the heck they are. Again, this plays into that idea of having that variation of sizes, thin lines, thick lines, things like that. All the roots or branches are basically the same size and thickness, so using this brush with some white ink to put in some of these smaller branches, it just adds some interest and some detail. And this is also something that's good to put in afterwards anyway, because I wouldn't have wanted to try to ink my black ink all the way around those very small branches. That would have been almost impossible. So better to come in with white ink afterwards and draw that stuff in. Same thing with all of the roots on that, the magical root system that she's holding. I hadn't thought about all those roots that are going straight up to the sky. They're kind of wiggling up to the sky there. That was something that came to me afterwards. I thought that's pretty cool. Alright, so here is the final piece of art, showing you some detail shots of it here and there. But as you can see, I kind of used a variety of tools in this piece. It was a lot of fun. It was a relaxing piece to work on. Hope you learned something by watching this. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.